From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. Those of us who've been sailing in San Francisco Bay for a while have noticed that the water got dirtier during the 80s and the 90s and a bit of the 2000s, and lately it's been getting cleaner and cleaner. Not as clean as we want it to be, but it is becoming a bit cleaner. All of this improvement in the bay and much more that we want and hope to find in the future is a result of an impressive growing number of environmentally conscious citizens who've taken up jobs at nonprofits and other organizations. Our speaker today is one of these impressive environmentalists. The topic is Beauty Ahead, Reimagining the San Francisco Estuary Shoreline. If you Google what San Francisco looked like in 1850, 1849, 1848, 1847, you'll learn that San Francisco was quite a bucolic, beautiful place. Of course, there were no pollutants anywhere. So in 1847, the little settlement called Yerba Buena, which at that point has less than 200 people living in it, decided to change its name to the bay that was next to the settlement. So Yerba Buena changed its name from Yerba Buena to San Francisco, naming itself after San Francisco Bay, which is right next to it. San Francisco Bay was far more famous at that time than Yerba Buena, and nobody knew about either one of them very much. Yerba Buena then became the island just east of Montgomery Street. We now know that as Yerba Buena and Treasure Island. Treasure Island being the man-made piece for the 1939 World's Fair. I am very happy to have Darcie Luce, environmental planner for the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, as our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's great to be here.
So I understand that you grew up in Kentucky and you spent some time sailing in Boston and then on Chesapeake Bay. And how is it that you decided that you wanted to make the environmental movement your professional arena?
Well, I think, growing up in Kentucky, I had wonderful access to the outdoors right outside my backyard and spent a lot of time just wandering around in the creeks around my house and around our neighborhood. So that instilled in me a deep love of that, of outdoors, of creeks and waterways and how they connect us to each other, and just continued that through my education and coming out here after college, discovering the beauty of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area and all of those different sites, the Muir Woods and Marin Headlands, having a chance to work in those places really deepened that love. So wanted to continue to work to bring further health to the areas that we love so much, the outdoor areas that we love so much, and really also looking at how people's activities and our activities as humans influence the health of that environment that we spend time in enjoying.
So now you got a master's degree in environmental anthropology. Whoa. I loved anthropology as a college student. I had the chance to meet several cool anthropologists in my day. Environmental anthropology, now that is a cool subject. Tell me about environmental anthropology as a modern study arena.
Sure. Well, I know that it's not very commonly heard about, but environmental anthropology is basically sociocultural anthropology. It's, as with all anthropology, looking at the way humans interact with one another and how they are influenced by their environment. Environmental anthropology, particularly in the applied form of it, which is what I really focused on as a grad student, is really looking at what are the environmental problems that we face and how are they both caused by human behavior, and what do we do culturally to either reinforce those problems or to solve those problems.
Right off the bat, I got to ask you about the cool background behind you. What is that estuary? It looks very verdant. Give me the dimensions, kind of left to right. Am I looking at? From what view am I looking? Eastward? Where am I looking at in that image behind you?
You are actually looking at a portion of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. This is a restored portion of the project. I'm sure you've heard about the extensive restoration of the South Bay salt ponds that has been taking place now for many years. As those salt ponds gradually become transitioned into what they were originally, which is natural tidal wetlands and marshland, you get to see these wonderful waterways that are carving through that greenery, and it's just a beautiful shot. Really like this one for all the greenery. This is a shot of the Yolo bypass in the Delta, which is part of the estuary, of course, and this is during the wet season when things get so flooded. So this is an area between Sacramento and Fairfield. I think Vacaville might be maybe more accurate to say between Vacaville and Sacramento. And it's a really large patch, including a wildlife area that is intentionally designed to accommodate the winter storms and flooding throughout, with a lot of farmland and of course some wildlife refuges in there as well. As Ron said, I'm Darcie Luce, and I'm an environmental planner with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Today, I'll be sharing with you our comprehensive plan for the estuary and the innovative efforts that plan is driving forward toward our shared regional goal of a healthy, resilient San Francisco estuary. As our name implies, we are a partnership, and our work cannot happen without the leadership and support of many individuals and agencies around the region. The projects and programs you're going to hear about today are the result of collaborative and cumulative efforts, often over years and even decades. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank the folks that are behind many of the innovations you'll be hearing about and who provided key information and materials to me. And I also want to acknowledge that the San Francisco Bay is the unceded ancestral homeland of many indigenous people, including the Himrin Ohlone Jalkeen, Saklan tribe, the Confederated Villages of Lejeune, the Karkeen, Muwekma, Ramaitush, Tamian, and Yokuts Ohlone, the Coast and Bay Miwok, Patwin, and the Amamutsan tribal band. The broader San Francisco estuary is also the homeland of the Plains Miwok, Wapo, Wintun, and Nisenan people. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership recognizes that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of these tribal communities, and by affirming their sovereign rights as first peoples of these nations. This image is an illustration done by artist Fernando Marti for the Segura Te Land Trust. So this is their image. It's an indigenous women-led land trust working to rematriate the lands of the Confederated Villages of Lejeune and supporting other indigenous land back movements.
Rematriate. Yeah.
Yes.
Now tell me this term rematriate. I got to hear this.
So rematriation is a term that has been coined by indigenous and women-led movements to give land back where there is unceded, which is everywhere, unceded ancestral territory, to give that land back. And rematriation, I think, recognizes the role and leadership both of the women that are leading these movements, as well as recognizing the importance of perhaps reframing when we say repatriation that has a patriarchal connotation, perhaps does not accurately reflect the culture of the indigenous people who are doing this work. However, that being said, I'm not really in a position to speak to this nearly as well as the folks who are leading this. And so I'm only doing my best approximation. This land has been stewarded since time immemorial by indigenous people. Before white folks came, European folks came to settle, as you spoke to, and mine and do all those other things. A few hundred years ago, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of years of indigenous land stewardship. So the San Francisco Estuary Partnership is a place-based non-regulatory program of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We are one of 28 entities in the National Estuary Program, which was established by Congress in 1988 to protect and restore estuaries of national significance. We leverage funding and partnerships to support efforts to protect, enhance, and restore the estuary system, and we work with a large suite of diverse partners. So we are really a federal local partnership. This map shows the planning area of the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, which covers the entire bay and the legal delta. And you had asked about the YOLO bypass. If you look at the green triangle that represents the legal delta there is a blue strip sort of in the top left of it. The legal delta is the extent that you see here in green, and that is been defined legislatively. Obviously, when we talk about hydrology and we talk about the way our planning area, which is mostly ecologically defined as the watersheds that drain to the estuary, if I really tried to include all of the watersheds that drain to the estuary, I would have to include the entire extent of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, which is most of California. However, that is far more ambitious than our capacity allows. And so we really try to stay focused with most of our work in the area that you see here.
This is a fascinating map, and I want to point out to our viewers that San Francisco Bay is different from many bays in America and really in the world, in that it is fed by a very active river system. And the amount of water that goes out the gate versus that which comes in with the tidal currents is significant. That water that goes out is called net delta outflow, and it represents the flow of water that comes down the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. And even that which is diverted past the delta, it goes down to Southern California with the peripheral canals, and they're originally, the first one is in the 70s. Now there's like 5 of them. Those diversions of water have changed the San Francisco Bay a fair amount, but it could change even more. If we stop water which is flowed from the mountains, the Shasta waters and so on, out San Francisco Bay, we'll change San Francisco. I didn't say San Francisco Bay, I said San Francisco. This is a really, really, really important issue. And Darcie, what you're doing, this kind of good God's work, is really important, because people don't understand that everybody from San Jose to Napa, from Oakland to San Francisco, Sausalito, Marin, San Mateo, et cetera, are all going to be affected as when we decrease the amount of water that flows from the Delta system through the bay. If the bay became just a dank, stale body of water, it would change the way it looked, smelled, what was in it. It would be very different. So it's really important that we restore the wetlands, and that people like your organization continue in your work, because it's a big important issue to the entire Bay Area.
And one of the things that we often, forget about is that this system is actually both Bay and Delta together. It's one ecological system. Oftentimes the folks in the Bay kind of forget about that upstream part, but our job at the Estuary Partnership is to really be thinking of this, our planning area, which is ecologically defined, and it drives us to think holistically. So we focus on the ecological basis in our planning and priority setting.
The Delta feeds the bay and makes it clean and healthy. And if you stop water coming down the Delta, it's like put a pond of water in your backyard and don't let water flow through it for a while. And you'll see what could happen in San Francisco Bay if we stopped the incredible estuary system, which is the Delta.
Of course, you do not need me to tell you what an estuary is, but I love this poster for how it reminds me that we live in this magical place where rivers drain into the ocean, and tidal saltwater and freshwater mix and create this area that's so rich in biodiversity and complex webs of habitats and wildlife. And of course, it also includes people. So estuaries all over draw people, and then towns, and then cities and ports and so on. And as you were talking about, that results in a lot of impacts. Of course, going back to the gold rush that you mentioned at the very start, that had huge effects on our estuary, the mining, the hydraulic mining that washed so much sediment downstream, as well as pollutants that came from quicksilver mining, silver mining, mercury and copper mining, and so on as well. More recently, we've got legacy impacts such as the shipbuilding yards from Hunters Point in San Francisco, like this picture you see here, Marin Ship in Marin County, and then industry of all kinds that used to be located along the shoreline where refuse could just be easily dumped in the water. And we just have a long list of pollutants from those days to try to clean up. And then upstream in the Delta, the dredging that happened there really radically altered the ecosystem. The marshy network of shifting reeds and water and channels was dredged into these very defined channels with dirt and rock levees alongside. And that radically changed the ecosystem. Of course, as large as our estuary is, we are the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. We still often forget, as I said before, about how it's actually connected to the entire state of California. And over the decades, we have re-engineered the natural hydrology of the state into this complex network of pipes and infrastructure that now relies on the estuary as the hub for providing drinking water for millions of people. So as we look forward into an uncertain future, climate change is likely to put more and more pressure on that system, creating further stresses for our fish and wildlife, and not to mention people. And of course, we're already seeing that play out with the current drought. This is from 2021, and this is a picture of Oroville Dam.
So you said this is the Oroville Dam, and that's like a couple hundred miles northeast of the San Francisco Bay Area. And this picture shows the water at a very low level. And this was taken in 2021?
Yes.
Okay. Holy moly. How much has it dropped in this picture?
You can look, so you can look in the background, you can see the actual lake. I think this is getting close to the outlet, but yeah, it is very dramatic.
You're saying this drought is related to climate change.
I mean, it's definitely, we are seeing a trend towards a drier future. And this is not, the meteorology of it is not my expertise, but with increased summer temperatures, sometimes increased spring temperatures, we really use our snowpack as our largest reservoir. And that snowpack is dwindling as rain falls and gets washed out. Definitely part of the cycle of climate change that we're seeing. Climate change is a factor in this drought. It's not necessarily driving the drought completely. So that's the upstream end of the system. As less freshwater flows into our estuary, then at the other end, the downstream end, we're also seeing the impacts of climate change during high tides, particularly king tides. So sea level rise is compromising our ability to get around the region. You can see this is a king tide along the Embarcadero. I'm not sure which year it is, but a recent king tide along the Embarcadero. And then it's also flooding our highways as is happening in Napa and Sonoma along Highway 37. Sea level rise also puts our vital infrastructure at risk. In addition to highways, including sewage treatment plants and hospitals, fire stations, schools, and businesses. You can see all of those are located here on this map, which represents potential flooding impacts in the South Bay in 2050 under 1.6 feet of sea level rise, plus a 20-year storm event.
Are you suggesting that if you simply rise sea level 1.6 plus a 20-year storm, this blue area would be former solid land, which is now underwater?
Yes, that is what the models are saying.
I've got my waders ready.
This is taken in Marin City. I think this was taken last year. Marin City is one of our underserved communities across our region where sea level rise is exacerbating existing problems such as flooding due to aging or inadequate drainage systems. And that puts public health and safety at risk. So looking to the past and looking ahead, we have a lot of work to do to make this estuary a healthy place to live, work, and play for both humans and wildlife together. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership is tasked with charting the path to a healthy, resilient San Francisco estuary through a comprehensive plan that's required by Congress. We call this plan the San Francisco Estuary Blueprint. And the blueprint works to clean up the legacy of past practices while also addressing climate change impacts of the present and future. The blueprint is both a regional collaborative vision that asks ourselves what we want to do and where we want to be as a region in 2050, and an actionable strategy for what we can do over the next 5 years to get there. We have just finished updating this plan through a 2-year process with input from over 160 collaborating agencies and organizations. The resulting 2022 Estuary Blueprint not only targets the most important actions we need to take now, it also elevates innovative efforts underway to address climate change, sea level rise, and legacy impacts to improve our water quality and protect our communities. I am excited to highlight some of those innovations for you today. This excerpt from the blueprint here, I know it's too small to see all the content on the page, but at least you can get a sense of the level of guidance that the plan offers for each topic covered by the plan.
Down below it says cost estimate key, and then it shows dollar signs. So $4 signs means $100 million. So these are the cost factors.
Yes, that's right. That's an estimate. There are 25 actions in the blueprint for 25 topics. And under each action, there are a set of tasks with a 5-year timeline. We're hoping to get each of those tasks done in the next 5 years. And the cost estimate is an estimate of how much it's going to take to accomplish that task. We are guided by a 38-member implementation committee. And that implementation committee includes business organizations such as Bay Area Council, Bay Planning Coalition, and others that very much have that interest at heart. So, innovations. So I'm going to talk about some of the exciting work that's taking place with our partners throughout the region that the blueprint is seeking to accelerate. The primary arena of innovation that I want to talk about with you today is nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are actions that we can take in the estuary, either along the shoreline, under the water near the shore, or even in the uplands, to soften our built hardscapes and protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural ecosystems in ways that solve some of our biggest challenges. Nature-based solutions provide some of the most innovative approaches to solving multiple problems at once. And I'll be covering some examples shortly. In addition, we are making long overdue efforts to center communities in these plans and projects, particularly those communities that continue to bear the brunt of past environmental practices and are already feeling the effects of climate change. Those underserved communities have been asking to have their priorities heard and their lived experience recognized, but government can be slow to change. So perhaps rather than calling these efforts innovations, we should call them best practices that need to be applied to address those environmental injustices. If we're able to scale up these innovations and best practices quickly throughout the region, we have the potential to transform the shoreline into a place that provides habitat for threatened and endangered wildlife, protects our vulnerable low-lying communities from flooding, improves water quality for boating, swimming, and fishing, and makes outdoor recreation more accessible to everyone. So first, the first innovative nature-based solution to talk about is horizontal levees, which are also occasionally called living levees, or you might hear the term ecotone slopes. Rather than a vertical concrete or reinforced dirt or rock wall, a horizontal levee combines a hardscape wall set back from the shoreline with a long, gently vegetated slope in front of it that diffuses the tidal energy of the waves as they approach the shoreline. Horizontal levees can provide many different benefits over a conventional levee. In addition to protection from flooding and sea level rise, horizontal levees provide critical wildlife habitat, including transition zones that allow habitats to migrate upland as sea level rises. And they can also improve water quality by filtering treated wastewater or stormwater. Depending on the horizontal levee location and the scope of the project, some projects also may offer recreation and public access opportunities. The Loma Living Laboratory at the Loma Sanitary District was the first horizontal levee in our region when it broke ground in 2015. It's an experimental pilot, so it was not connected directly to the bay as the graphic I just showed on the last slide, but it showed proof of concept. The project successfully reused treated wastewater that would have been discharged directly to the bay, and it showed an incredible potential to improve the quality of that treated wastewater by reducing excess nutrients and contaminants of emerging concern and reverse osmosis or RO concentrate, which is a waste byproduct of the reverse osmosis wastewater treatment process. The project also demonstrated that freshwater input increased plant growth and supported biodiversity. It built up organic soils to help keep pace with sea level rise, and it slowed and filtered stormwater. We're still working with UC Berkeley and other partners to learn valuable lessons from this pilot project. Another pilot horizontal levee project is the North Richmond Living Levee. This project is still in the planning stages, and it will be situated at the West County Wastewater District in North Richmond. It will create a vegetated slope or living levee to provide upland habitat, including refuge spots for wildlife during high tides and migration space for habitats and wildlife to transition further upland with sea level rise. Looking at this from the air, this being the general area of the North Richmond Living Levee, and as I mentioned before, the scope of that project is still being determined right now. Potentially a very ambitious project if they're able to do the full scope, which is why I don't have anything marked on the map. It could be as limited as being there at the West County Wastewater District site, or it could stretch along a significant portion of the shoreline. But there are a lot of hurdles to get through in order to make that determination. So didn't want to pin anything down prematurely. I will come back to this project when I talk about the best practice of centering community-led design, but this project does have the potential to reduce flood risk to critical infrastructure and transportation systems along the shoreline, protect adjacent residential communities, and it'll also provide wildlife habitat. I wanted to share this quote by the former general manager of the Loma Sanitary District, Jason Warner. His leadership helped start the pilot horizontal levee project there, and it really highlights how much we have to gain by succeeding at these types of ambitious projects. It's the difference between having an environmental friendly win and having a grand slam. So we're facilitating more horizontal levee projects through our Transforming Shorelines Collaborative, which brings together experts and stakeholders from every sector to talk through the challenges associated with these new efforts. Now let's talk about advances being made with living shorelines. So living shorelines are another nature-based solution or suite of nature-based solutions, and types of living shorelines projects include oyster reef restoration, eelgrass bed planting, and living seawalls. The San Francisco Bay Living Shorelines Project, which is a project of the California State Coastal Conservancy, is demonstrating the potential of establishing native eelgrass and oyster beds to protect the San Francisco Bay shoreline while creating biologically rich and diverse habitat that is resilient to changing environmental conditions. Living Shorelines projects diffuse tidal energy, provide critical habitat, and improve water quality in the estuary. And the Coastal Conservancy has just received funding to prepare preliminary site designs for 10 living shorelines projects throughout the San Francisco Bay. So the map here shows the locations of those 10 projects, as well as the locations of current and past pilot study areas. Oyster reef restoration uses a specially designed substrate of crushed oyster shells, sand, and other materials to create complex structures that our native Olympia oyster will adhere to. Once established, these reefs will benefit wildlife and will decrease the power and force of waves as they approach the shore. The decreased wave energy reduces flooding and erosion of the shoreline and allows sediments to accrete or accumulate, which enables the shoreline to rise along with sea levels. Reefs have been shown to reduce wave energy by 30 to 50%. Also, oysters are incredibly efficient at filtering pollutants from water. An adult oyster can filter as much as 50 gallons of water a day, which can really improve water quality for the bay.
So now, where are you doing these projects? This is totally fascinating.
Yeah, I thought it was too, which is why I wanted to include it. These are pictures of installation of these reef structures at Giant Marsh. There is an expert that I would highly recommend talking to or having even come speak to your luncheon if you haven't had her come recently. So eelgrass planting is another element, often working synchronously with the oyster reef restoration. And eelgrass provides essential habitat and food sources for both aquatic species and birds and other wildlife. And like the other nature-based solutions I'm talking about, it can also dissipate that wave energy and improve water quality. Eelgrass planting has been taking place in the San Francisco Bay for many years now, and it involves transplanting mature plants or seeds taken from healthy donor beds to a restoration site once suitable environmental conditions have been established for eelgrass survival. It's labor intensive. It involves planting the individual units by hand or by tying the eelgrass to these transplant frames. The San Francisco Bay has many excellent locations, including Richardson Bay, where eelgrass restoration has taken place, but some eelgrass restoration sites have been wiped out completely in a single year. So now that we're learning a lot about restorations and sites, our partners have been developing an updated eelgrass habitat suitability model using data and knowledge gained over the last 10 years, and that will enable our partners to improve success rates of restoration efforts. So going back to that site, the Giant Marsh project, in some ways you could argue that living shorelines projects are not a new concept because our partners have been conducting studies on pilot projects for over the last 10 years and more. But the most recent project, this Giant Marsh project, which was started in installation started in 2019, it's the largest to date for the Bay. And it incorporates a lot of different elements. It incorporates oyster reef restoration and eelgrass bed planting and also a mosaic of plantings and oyster reef structures extending from the shallows all the way up to the edge of the uplands. There is a total habitat footprint of about 2 acres, I think, scattered over an area totaling 350 acres. So overall, the entire area is fairly large.
Where is this? Where is this happening?
This is off Point Panola Regional Shoreline.
They look like little man-made clusters that support shoreline restoration. How do they work?
Yeah, that picture on the right side, those are a different version of those reef structures, like the reef balls that you saw in a couple slides ago. They are experimenting with different shapes and different substrates to see what works the best for the oysters. There are other activities happening at Giant Marsh, including invasive plant removal. There's also establishment. They're working to establish a key plant called California sea blight. That plant is really an important plant for providing high tide refuge for endangered salt marsh harvest mouse and other wildlife. And they're really at an exciting point. So the Coastal Conservancy and other partners are really at this point of expansion and increased scale. The pace and scale of implementing these types of projects has been slow in many municipalities due to data gaps and just lack of on-the-ground experience. It's also really complex and difficult sometimes to get these projects permitted. And the total number of living shorelines projects in the Bay Area is still pretty small compared to other areas like the East Coast and Gulf Coast and Pacific Northwest. So even though we are at the forefront in so many ways, we have some catching up to do. So when hardscapes and vertical concrete walls are the only option, living seawalls may be one nature-based solution that creates habitat and offers greater benefits than just bare concrete. This is a picture taken in San Francisco along the Embarcadero. There's an experiment underway to install textured panels along the existing seawall so that they attract and support wildlife like herring, oysters, rockweed, hermit crabs, and other native species. This past October, 288 panels were installed near the ferry building. And they were installations with different textures and different size panels, installed at different depths, and put in different locations along the seawall to see which factors result in the greatest success.
Wow, this is so fascinating. Wonderful. Which one of your partners was pioneering this innovation?
This is a multi-partner project being led by the city of San Francisco, I believe. I would suggest going to a publication. This picture was actually taken from an online publication called Knee Deep Times, which covers climate resilience, especially innovative climate resilience efforts like this. And there's a lot more information there. I'm happy to share the link to that article. But if you just Google Knee Deep Times, you'll probably find it very easily. In addition, they're going to apply a chemical signature to these panels to attract marine species. So these panels will be monitored over the next 2 years and more to see what works, and we'll see what happens. So turning to best practices, there is an unprecedented and long overdue effort underway by agencies, including ours, to give communities a bigger voice in planning and designing restoration projects. Like many other agencies around the region, the San Francisco Estuary Partnership is working to shift away from the traditional top-down project planning approach in which communities are consulted late in the planning process in a perfunctory check-the-box way, unfortunately, has been frequently the way in which that has been done. And really moving toward a more meaningful engagement that centers community-led design and grassroots leadership. Some of the ways we're seeking to do that are through facilitating community visioning, seeking community input earlier in the planning process, even at the process of seeking funding, and consulting with tribes, regardless of their recognition status, federal recognition status, consulting with tribes beyond specific projects. For instance, we actively sought out the perspective of underserved communities and tribes during the most recent update of the Estuary Blueprint, and we plan to expand on that effort in future updates as well. For one example, several years ago, we secured a grant to facilitate a community visioning process for the North Richmond shoreline in collaboration with the local community-based organization, the Watershed Project. That collaboration resulted in a collective vision for the North Richmond shoreline with a suite of identified environmental projects and priorities that came from the residents. You can see a piece of that articulated vision there on the right.
I'm assuming it's the green areas.
No, the numbered, you can see the different numbered circles. The different numbered circles represent all the different opportunities for all different types of projects, from urban greening projects up to and including the horizontal levee project that I talked about earlier.
So let me get clear on what that term horizontal levee project means. Tell me generically, horizontal levee. We all know what horizontal is. We know what levees are. The delta's filled with these levees where you built up the edge of the shoreline so that you can have farmlands on the inland side of the delta. of the shoreline. So
a horizontal levee still involves some degree of the conventional levee, which you can see there on the very right, but it's set way back from the shoreline. Instead of setting right at the edge where the water hits, it's set way back. And then there's a long, gentle slope that connects it to the shoreline, where you have a variety of habitats and plantings that can provide wildlife habitat. But also they really break up the wave energy as it hits the shore, so that those waves are not crashing right into a concrete wall. Instead, they are gently lapping at a whole long slope of vegetation.
So looking left to right, mud flat, then tidal marsh, wave attenuation. So you've got a certain kind of vegetation there. Then brackish marsh, different kind of vegetation as the sea levels, as you've raised up the shoreline. Now the strata that I see illustrated in brackish marsh area, does that represent you guys adding fill, layers of fill to build it up so that it's higher? And then there's this dipped area, which you call freshwater swale. What do you call that? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, a freshwater swale. So this is just one example of a potential horizontal levee design. They have different designs really based on location. Some of them are going to have a much simpler design than this because they may not have the stretch of land to play with in order to have this sequence of different habitats and different systems. They may have a very much shorter area to play with for whatever reason, for space constraints. This one is really the type of example that you might have if you have enough space away from the shoreline or where the water hits and where the waves come. And if you also, for instance, at wastewater treatment plants where we're working, have the ability to use treated wastewater to then irrigate and provide fresh water input for the plants that are going to be installed. And yes, you do often need to build that up, but as those plants get established and as that water comes in and those plants grow, they will also do their own building up over time. We're trying to keep pace with sea level rise with these horizontal levee projects by actually letting the plants do the work. Speaking of horizontal levees, that was one of the suite of projects that was suggested by this collective vision for the North Richmond shoreline. So after this collective community-based visioning process, community was actually selected as one of the 10 sites that participated in the Resilient by Design Challenge a few years ago. That Resilient by Design Challenge resulted in even more community input into planning for the shoreline. And you can see some of the individuals from that process that are pictured in that left photo. So these efforts cumulatively laid the foundation for the West County Wastewater District's horizontal levee planning process that I talked about earlier. And in 2019, the West County Wastewater District initiated stakeholder meetings to engage landowners and government organizations and community members toward collaboratively seeking a solution to the threat that their wastewater treatment plant faces with sea level rise. So as with most of the wastewater treatment plants in the Bay Area, the West County Wastewater District's plant is located adjacent to the shoreline and is vulnerable to inundation under sea level rise. So in 2021, they received a state grant to work with engineers and with the Watershed Project to develop designs for a horizontal levee project. And the Watershed Project is continuing to seek community input as that process is moving forward. And we've continued to support that effort. Of course, this process has involved many more partners than just the ones I've had the ability to mention here. These are all huge multi-stakeholder projects, and it takes more than a village. It takes a whole collective of dozens of organizations and funding sources to move these really ambitious projects forward. Putting it all together, I have talked about nature-based solutions and how they can address multiple problems at once. They can protect communities from flooding and provide vital wildlife habitat and recreational opportunities and improve water quality. They can help the region adapt to sea level rise. We covered specific examples of nature-based solutions from horizontal levees to living shorelines projects like oyster reef restoration and eelgrass bed planting and living seawall installation. Also recognize that these projects really cannot take place without meaningful community involvement from the beginning, including giving communities and tribes a leadership role. So taken all together, scaled up with boosted funding and strong regional partnerships, we can transform the shoreline into a place that provides that wildlife habitat and protects communities and improves water quality. And we can adapt to sea level rise. This is just a portion of the opportunities that await us if we reimagine the shoreline. So the pace and scale of implementing nature-based shorelines and solutions is slow, but prioritizing a nature-based solutions approach to adaptation, the Estuary Blueprint is helping to accelerate funding and regional partnerships to overcome the challenges to scaling these efforts up across our estuary. The Blueprint is the key framework that nudges these innovative approaches forward toward a healthy, resilient estuary. It's collaborative, it is integrated, and it's aspirational, but also feasible, and it addresses our most urgent challenges and holds us all accountable for the future. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. That is the end of my slideshow.
Wonderful. Darcie, thank you very much. It's impressive. I'm very happy to listen to what your partnership is doing to muster forces for good change and opportunities for innovation, technological and organizational. How many different organizations are in your partnership?
Well, as I mentioned, our partnership is guided by an implementation committee, which has representatives from a really broad number of sectors. We try and be as broad as possible in terms of our organization's guidance, but the blueprint as a suite of actions and tasks has a much larger cohort of agencies and organizations and businesses and research think tanks and so on, all invested in advancing the specific tasks that we need to get done in the next 5 years to make significant progress towards a healthy, resilient estuary. So there's always opportunity and more room for more, for sure. We can always expand that partnership and welcome new participants. But you can find that list in the front of our Estuary Blueprint document, and all of that is online. You can also see our specific tasks for each action topic in the blueprint, and you can see the partners that have signed up to be actively involved in getting that task done.
So you said think tank. Which organization is a think tank that's contributed to the blueprint?
There's a lot. We've got a lot of research organizations that continue to advise us. It really depends on the topic. Off the top of my head, I can say that San Francisco Estuary Institute is definitely a leader in scientific research on estuarine health, specifically the San Francisco Estuary. I think you've had folks from there come and speak to you in the past, but I'd be happy to put you in contact with folks there.
Okay. So now I said think tank because, like I said, I used to be in a think tank called Synectics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But so are these true Blue Horizon visioners? And if so, we're quite interested in hearing from them. And if you could pass me along a contact, we would pursue that because it's a fascinating field for think tank activity. Thank you very much, Darcie Luce of the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, for a thought-provoking and thoughtful presentation. Thanks.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.